The lecture hall aboard the Galactic Defense Academy's flagship stretched for nearly a kilometer, its crystalline walls humming with translated voices from dozens of species. Commander of the Empire stood before the assembled cadets, his 6 arms gesturing at the holographic display showing various battle formations from across the galaxy. "Today we begin your studies on the member of our coalition," announced, his mandibles clicking with what passed for enthusiasm among his kind. "The species known as humans have recently joined our ranks, and their military tactics require special attention." A ripple of curiosity passed through the audience. Cadet, a towering whose body resembled living gemstone, raised one of her tentacle-like appendages. "Commander, are humans particularly advanced? Their technology seems primitive compared to most coalition members." His compound eyes darkened slightly. "That, cadet, is precisely the misconception we must address. Humans are unpredictable. Their approach to warfare defies conventional strategic doctrine." The holographic display shifted to show Earth's solar system, then zoomed in to reveal the blue-green world that had caught the galaxy's attention. "Humans evolved on a death world," continued. "Their planet experiences weather patterns that would kill most species, geological instability that reshapes continents, and an ecosystem where every creature competes for survival. This has shaped their military thinking in ways that continue to baffle our greatest strategists." Cadet Hun, a methane-breathing hexapod, spoke through his translation device. "Surely their primitive nature makes them easy to predict. Most young species follow similar patterns of aggressive expansion followed by diplomatic integration." "That assumption," said, manipulating the display to show several human conflicts, "has led to our current predicament. 3 weeks ago, the hegemony have declared war on the human colony of New Geneva. They are experienced conquerors with a fleet of 800 vessels and ground forces numbering in the millions. They expected easy victory against a human settlement defended by merely 50 ships and 30,000 soldiers." The display now showed the New Geneva system, a modest collection of planets orbiting a young star. The followed standard doctrine. They established orbital superiority, cut off supply lines, and began systematic bombardment of military installations. By all calculations, human resistance should have collapsed within 72 hours. Cadet Ara, whose species had evolved from pack hunters, leaned forward with interest. "But it didn't." "The humans surrendered after 60 hours, confirmed, causing murmurs of confusion among the students. "The commander, General K, accepted their surrender and began occupation procedures. His forces landed on 3 major population centers, establishing command posts and beginning administrative control." The holographic display zoomed in to show the surface of New Geneva's primary world. Cities dotted the landscape, connected by transport networks that seemed almost quaint compared to the floating cities and dimensional gates preferred by more advanced civilizations. "What happened next violated every principle of conquered population behavior," continued. "The humans who had surrendered simply disappeared. Not fled, not hidden in obvious locations, but vanished into their own cities and countryside as if they had never existed." His crystalline form shimmered with confusion. "How is that possible? Thermal scans, genetic trackers, psychic resonance, surely they could locate them." "They tried everything," confirmed. "But humans, it seems, are naturally gifted at what they call guerrilla warfare. Their own history is filled with examples of smaller forces defeating larger ones through tactics that prioritize survival, adaptation, and unconventional thinking." The display shifted to show patrol routes through human cities. General K's forces began experiencing what they initially dismissed as equipment failures. Communication arrays would malfunction at crucial moments. Supply convoys would suffer navigational errors, ending up in empty wasteland instead of their destinations. Automated defense systems would activate randomly, forcing soldiers to waste time and energy responding to false alarms. Hun's 6 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep thought among his people. "Sabotage, then? Most species attempt that during occupation." "Not like this," replied, bringing up tactical analysis charts. "Most species engage in sabotage through direct action explosives, computer viruses, coordinated strikes on infrastructure. Humans use something far more insidious. They turned the own systems against them through methods so subtle that it took days to realize the problems weren't random." The display now showed examples of human interference. A single altered line of code in a logistics program would cause supply ships to deliver winter clothing to tropical bases and cooling units to Arctic outposts. Modified sensor calibrations would make proximity alarms trigger when harmless local wildlife approached, conditioning guards to ignore warnings until real threats appeared. Traffic management systems would route patrols through areas where local festivals or gatherings would naturally occur, making the occupying forces appear deliberately oppressive to civilian populations. Aura's pack hunter instincts recognized something familiar. They were hurting the enemy's behavior. Precisely, confirmed with something approaching admiration. But this was only the beginning. While the forces struggled with these constant minor disruptions, something far more significant was happening. The human population wasn't hiding, they were organizing. The holographic display transformed to show underground networks spreading beneath New Geneva cities like root systems. Humans, it appears, have an unusual relationship with their urban environments. While most species build cities as centers of administration and commerce, humans build them as ecosystems. Their cities contain vast networks of tunnels, maintenance shafts, abandoned areas, and forgotten spaces that exist beneath the surface of normal life. His crystal body pulsed with interest. You mean they have parallel infrastructure? More than that, explained. They have parallel societies. During the occupation, while they controlled the visible city above ground, the humans simply moved their essential functions below ground. They established command centers in subway tunnels, supply depots in forgotten basements, communication networks through maintenance shafts that had been built decades ago and forgotten by official records. The display showed cross-sections of human cities, revealing the hidden complexity beneath seemingly simple surface structures. What makes this remarkable is that these underground networks weren't military installations. They were civilian infrastructure that humans repurposed for resistance activities. Shopping centers became staging areas. School gymnasiums became training facilities. Library basements became intelligence centers. Hun's translation device crackled with confusion. But how did they coordinate without the detecting communications? They used their own history, replied, bringing up examples of human communication methods. Humans have spent their entire evolutionary history finding ways to share information despite interference. They used techniques ranging from ancient signal fires to modern social media, but adapted in ways that confused alien monitoring systems. The display showed various human communication methods. They spray-painted symbols on walls that looked like random graffiti but contained detailed tactical information. They embedded messages in music broadcasts that sounded like entertainment but included coded instructions. They even used their own children as couriers, since they had classified human offspring as non-threatening civilians. Aura's hunting instincts were fully engaged now. They were using the enemy's assumptions against them. Constantly, confirmed. They assumed that any serious resistance would be militaristic, organized, and detectable through standard surveillance methods. They looked for army units, command hierarchies, and supply chains that matched their own experience. Instead, they found a population that had transformed every civilian activity into potential resistance work. The holographic display began showing examples of human resistance activities that had baffled the teachers organized intelligence networks through their students. Shopkeepers created supply chains for resistance equipment through their normal business networks. Artists spread propaganda through seemingly innocent cultural events. Even their elderly population contributed by sharing historical knowledge about previous occupations their species had endured. Cadetin, who had been silent throughout the lecture, finally spoke. His species, the Contemplators, were known for their logical approach to all problems. Commander, this suggests that human resistance wasn't centrally organized. How did they maintain strategic coherence without formal command structure? His mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. That question gets to the heart of what makes human strategy so difficult to counter. They have something they call emergent leadership, the ability for command structures to form spontaneously based on circumstances rather than predetermined hierarchy. The display shifted to show network diagrams of human resistance cells. Instead of a single leader making decisions for everyone, humans formed temporary leadership groups based on expertise, local knowledge, and immediate needs. A teacher might lead an intelligence operation in her school district. A mechanic might command sabotage operations in industrial areas. A doctor might coordinate rescue operations in medical facilities. crystalline form shimmered with confusion. But how do they prevent conflicts between different leaders? Most species require clear hierarchy to avoid chaos. They use something they call mission command, explained. Instead of detailed orders from above, human leaders provide general objectives and allow subordinates to determine methods. This creates a resistance network that adapts faster than any centralized command structure could respond to changing conditions. The holographic display began showing timelines of human resistance activities during the occupation. While General K's forces were still trying to establish proper command and control over the population, the humans had already begun the second phase of their resistance. They started targeting not just military assets, but this ability to understand and control human society. Hun's eyes blinked rapidly. They attacked their knowledge base. Brilliantly so, confirmed. Humans began feeding false information to intelligence-gathering efforts. They created fake civilian organizations for the occupiers to monitor while real resistance groups operated under different identities. They staged public arguments between fictional resistance leaders to misdirect enemy attention away from actual operations. The display showed examples of human deception operations. They held fake surrender ceremonies in locations that were actually traps. They created false supply caches for forces to discover, filled with equipment that would malfunction at crucial moments. They even established fake black market networks that the thought they were exploiting for intelligence, but which were actually feeding them useless or misleading information. Aura's pack-hunting mind was beginning to grasp the scope of human strategy. They weren't just fighting the occupation, they were fighting the occupiers' ability to understand what they were fighting. Exactly, agreed. And this is what ultimately led to this current predicament. After 2 weeks of occupation, General K's forces controlled the infrastructure, monitored the population, and maintained orbital superiority. By all traditional measures, they had won the war, but they couldn't actually govern the territory they had conquered because they no longer understood what was happening within it. The holographic display began showing the breakdown of control. Supply requisitions would be filled, but with materials that were subtly wrong for their intended purposes. Population surveys would be conducted, but would somehow miss significant portions of the civilian population. Construction projects would be completed on schedule, but wouldn't function properly due to small errors in design or materials. Cadet X, whose aquatic species was known for patience and careful observation, raised a fin-like appendage. Commander, you speak of this in past tense, but mentioned the conflict began 3 weeks ago. What is the current status? His compound eyes darkened again. That brings us to the third and most troubling phase of human resistance strategy. Having established that they could operate invisibly within their own occupied territory, and having convinced that they controlled a population they actually knew nothing about, the humans began their counterattack. The display shifted to show real-time tactical information from the New Geneva system. 4 days ago, every installation on the planet experienced simultaneous, coordinated attacks. But these weren't conventional military strikes. The humans had spent 2 weeks learning exactly how forces operated, where they felt safe, and what they considered secure. The images showed command posts, supply depots, and communication arrays all suffering coordinated but different types of attack. Each target was hit by methods specifically designed to exploit the particular vulnerabilities the humans had observed at that location. Command posts with heavy orbital support were attacked through cyber warfare that turned their own defenses against them. Supply depots with strong perimeter security were destroyed by infiltrators who had been living among the guard forces for weeks. Communication arrays protected by force fields were disabled by carefully planned electromagnetic pulses that seemed to come from their own equipment. An's logical mind was processing the implications. They used the occupation period as an intelligence-gathering operation. More than that, replied grimly. They used it as a training exercise. Every soldier who had been frustrated by equipment failures, every officer who had struggled with supply problems, every administrator who had been confused by civilian behavior, they had all been unknowingly teaching the humans how to defeat them. The holographic display began showing current battle footage from New Geneva. General K's forces now find themselves fighting an enemy that knows their doctrine better than they do, understands their weaknesses more clearly than their own strategists, and has spent weeks preparing counters for every tactic they might employ. The images were disturbing to the assembled cadets. Forces, normally efficient and overwhelming in their operations, appeared confused and reactive. Their formations were constantly disrupted by attacks that seemed to anticipate their movements. Their communication networks were unreliable due to ongoing sabotage that always stayed one step ahead of their countermeasures. The most troubling aspect, continued, is that the humans appear to be winning while still being significantly outnumbered, and they've turned this superior firepower into a liability by forcing them to fight in environments where heavy weapons cause more problems than they solve. They've negated this numerical advantage by making it impossible for them to concentrate their forces effectively. His crystal body pulsed with nervous energy. Commander, are you saying that humans can defeat superior forces through tactics alone? Paused before answering, his 6 arms moving in complex patterns that conveyed deep uncertainty among his people. I am saying that humans approach warfare in ways that render our traditional concepts of superior and inferior forces meaningless. They don't fight to destroy enemy forces. They fight to make enemy forces destroy themselves. The lecture hall had grown very quiet. The implications of what they were learning extended far beyond academic interest. These cadets would someday face humans in battle, either as allies or enemies. Tomorrow, announced, we will examine specific examples of human tactical innovations and discuss how conventional forces might adapt to counter them. I encourage you all to review the historical records from your own species' conflicts. Look for examples of smaller forces defeating larger ones, and consider whether those victories might have employed principles similar to what the humans used at New Geneva. As the cadets began filing out of the lecture hall, their conversations buzzed with nervous excitement. They had come expecting to learn about primitive tactics from a newly discovered species. Instead, they had discovered that their entire understanding of military strategy might be inadequate when facing an enemy that thought about warfare in fundamentally different ways. But none of them yet realized that the events at New Geneva were only the beginning of humanity's introduction to galactic warfare, and that the lessons they would learn tomorrow would prove even more disturbing than what they had heard today. The next morning, the lecture hall aboard the Galactic Defense Academy's flagship buzzed with anticipation. Word of yesterday's session had spread throughout the academy, drawing not only the original cadets, but also several senior officers and even a few representatives from allied species intelligence services. Commander noticed the expanded audience as he prepared his materials, his compound eyes tracking the additional figures scattered throughout the crystalline amphitheater. Before we continue, announced, I must inform you that the situation at New Geneva has evolved significantly overnight. A wave of murmurs passed through the assembly as the holographic display activated, showing real-time feeds from the conflict zone. General K's forces have been completely driven off-world, he continued, causing several gasps from the audience. The fleet has retreated to the outer system, where they are currently regrouping and requesting reinforcements from their home territories. This represents the first time in recorded military history that they have been forced to abandon a successfully occupied world. Cadet's crystalline form shimmered with disbelief. In one night, how is that possible? Manipulated the display to show tactical analyses of the final phase of the conflict. The humans employed what they call asymmetric escalation. Instead of matching this increasing force levels with equivalent responses, they changed the nature of the conflict itself. The holographic images showed New Geneva's cities during the final hours of occupation. They had begun using heavy orbital bombardment to flush out human resistance positions. Standard military doctrine suggests this should have forced the humans to either surrender or concentrate their forces for defense, making them vulnerable to conventional attack. Hun's translation device crackled with confusion. That logic seems sound. How did the humans respond? They abandoned the cities entirely, replied, causing another ripple of surprise through the audience. But not in the way they expected. Rather than fleeing to rural areas or underground bunkers, the humans evacuated their civilian population while simultaneously transforming their urban environments into what they call area denial weapons. The display shifted to show cross-sections of human cities that had been systematically modified during the occupation. Using the same underground networks we discussed yesterday, human engineers had spent weeks installing what they term defensive infrastructure throughout their population centers. But these weren't traditional fortifications or weapon emplacements. The images revealed a complex web of modifications that seemed almost organic in their integration with existing city structures. They had turned their own cities into enormous traps. Every building, every street, every utility system had been modified to create cascading failures if triggered by occupying forces. Admiral of the Hegemony Navy, one of the senior observers, spoke for the first time. "You mean they booby-trapped their own infrastructure? More sophisticated than simple explosive devices," explained. "They created what their engineers call progressive infrastructure collapse. When forces attempted to use orbital bombardment to destroy suspected resistance positions, the humans triggered coordinated structural failures that caused entire city blocks to collapse in carefully controlled sequences." The holographic display demonstrated the effect with disturbing clarity. The bombardment would destroy the targeted building, but the collapse would trigger failures in underground support systems that would cause adjacent buildings to fall in directions that blocked major transportation routes. Water and power systems would fail in patterns that created floods and fires in areas where ground forces were concentrated. Communication networks would overload and create electromagnetic interference that disrupted equipment. Cadet Aura's pack hunter instincts were struggling to process what she was seeing. They destroyed their own cities to deny them to the enemy. They destroyed them in ways that made them more dangerous to the enemy than to themselves, corrected. The human civilians had been evacuated through routes that avoided the trap zones. The human military forces had prepared alternate positions that were actually strengthened by the controlled collapse of certain structures. But the forces found themselves operating in an environment that was actively trying to kill them. The display showed ground units struggling to navigate through urban areas that seemed to change configuration every few hours. Roads would disappear due to controlled subsidence. Buildings that appeared structurally sound would collapse when heavy vehicles attempted to use them as strong points. Underground facilities that seemed secure would flood or fill with toxic gases when their ventilation systems activated. Admiral was studying the tactical displays with growing unease. This level of preparation would require extensive advance planning. Are you suggesting the humans anticipated occupation and prepared these modifications before the conflict began? His mandibles clicked in what might have been grudging admiration. Intelligence analysis suggests that humans routinely prepare for the possibility that their own territory might become a battlefield. They call it homeland defense planning, and it appears to be a standard component of their military doctrine. The holographic display shifted to show examples of human defensive preparations from their own historical conflicts. Human cities are apparently designed with the assumption that they might someday need to be defended by the civilian population against superior military forces. Their infrastructure includes features that seem purely civilian, but can be rapidly converted for military use. Cadet raised a logical question, but surely they could have simply destroyed the cities entirely from orbit. They attempted exactly that, confirmed, bringing up orbital bombardment footage. But this triggered the most disturbing aspect of human defensive strategy. The humans had prepared what they call scorched earth protocols, systematic destruction of anything that might be useful to occupying forces. The images showed industrial facilities, spaceports, and resource extraction sites throughout the New Geneva system undergoing coordinated destruction. But these weren't random acts of sabotage. The humans destroyed their infrastructure in ways specifically designed to create long-term environmental and economic problems for anyone attempting to control the territory. Admiral was leaning forward now, his attention completely focused. Environmental warfare. "Precisely," replied grimly. "Mining facilities were collapsed in ways that contaminated groundwater supplies. Chemical plants were destroyed using methods that created toxic waste zones that would remain dangerous for decades. Agricultural areas were deliberately infected with engineered plagues that would make the soil unusable for food production." The holographic display showed environmental damage assessments from across the New Geneva system. The humans had made their own territory economically worthless to any potential conqueror, while ensuring that the damage could be reversed using techniques known only to themselves. His crystal body pulsed with horror. "They poisoned their own world." "Temporarily," clarified. Intelligence suggests that the environmental damage was designed to be reversible through processes that the humans had developed before implementing the destruction. They essentially created biological and chemical locks that only they possessed the keys to open. Hun's 6 eyes were blinking rapidly, so conquest would gain the nothing but dead territory. Worse than nothing, confirmed. The environmental damage was designed to spread beyond the immediate target areas if not properly contained. Any force attempting to occupy New Geneva would find themselves responsible for managing expanding ecological disasters that would drain resources and attention away from military objectives. The display began showing casualty reports from forces during the final phase of the conflict. As the human defensive strategy became clear, General K's forces found themselves in an impossible position. They could not maintain control over a population that didn't exist in any location they could identify. They could not use the infrastructure of a world that was actively destroying itself around them. They could not justify the massive resource expenditure required to maintain forces on a planet that was becoming more dangerous and less valuable every day. Admiral was studying the tactical analyses with the expression of someone recognizing patterns that disturbed him deeply. "Commander, this suggests that humans view their own territory as expendable in the pursuit of strategic objectives." "That assessment appears correct," agreed. "But this brings us to the most troubling aspect of human military thinking. Their willingness to sacrifice their own resources extends beyond territory to include their own forces." The holographic display shifted to show the final engagement between human and forces as the occupation collapsed. As the fleet prepared to evacuate their ground forces, the humans launched what they called a pursuit operation. But this wasn't an attempt to prevent the retreat. It was an attempt to learn as much as possible about fleet capabilities. The images showed small human vessels, clearly and outnumbered, conducting seemingly suicidal attacks against the withdrawing fleet. These attacks had no hope of causing significant damage to heavily shielded capital ships, but they weren't intended to destroy enemy vessels. Cadet X, whose aquatic species valued careful observation, recognized the pattern. They were reconnaissance attacks. Intelligence gathering through combat engagement, confirmed. The human vessels were equipped with sophisticated sensor packages designed to record detailed information about ship capabilities, defensive patterns, communication protocols, and tactical responses. Every attack, regardless of its immediate success or failure, was providing data about how fleet commanders thought and operated. The display showed the final moments of several human ships as they pressed their attacks beyond any reasonable hope of survival. The humans were trading their own vessels and crew members for information about enemy capabilities, not because they lacked alternative methods of intelligence gathering, but because they calculated that the knowledge gained was worth more than the forces sacrificed to obtain it. Aura's pack-hunting background helped her understand this mindset, but it still disturbed her. "They hunt the hunters." "They study the hunters by becoming prey," corrected. Human combat doctrine appears to include the assumption that temporary tactical defeats can provide strategic advantages if the defeats are conducted in ways that reveal enemy capabilities and limitations. Admiral was beginning to look genuinely worried. "Commander, are you suggesting that humans view military engagements as learning experiences rather than contests to be won or lost?" "Evidence suggests that humans view every military engagement as both," replied. "They fight to win immediate objectives, but they also fight to understand their enemies better. Even when they lose battles, they gain knowledge that improves their chances in future conflicts." The holographic display began showing intelligence analyses of the information the humans had gathered during their losing battles against the fleet. The data collected during these suicide attacks has apparently allowed human strategists to develop detailed profiles of fleet capabilities, command structures, and tactical preferences. This information is now being shared with other members of the Galactic Coalition. The implications of this statement caused a stir throughout the lecture hall. "You mean the humans are distributing intelligence about military capabilities?" asked Admiral. "More than that," confirmed. "They are using their analysis of tactics to develop general principles about how to fight technologically superior forces. The lessons learned at New Geneva are being incorporated into human military doctrine for future conflicts." The display shifted to show human military training facilities where soldiers were practicing techniques developed from their analysis of the occupation. Humans appear to have something they call institutional learning, the ability to rapidly incorporate new knowledge into their existing military practices and share that knowledge across their entire military organization. Cadet Hun was struggling with the implications, but surely this approach only works against enemies who follow predictable patterns. His compound eyes focused on the young cadet. That question reveals a fundamental misunderstanding about human strategic thinking. Humans don't assume their enemies will be predictable. They assume that all enemies, including themselves, will eventually be analyzed and countered by their opponents. The holographic display began showing examples of human military exercises where their own forces practiced against tactics and strategies developed by human strategists. Humans routinely train by attempting to defeat their own military doctrine. They assume that any strategy they develop will eventually be or countered by their enemies, so they practice fighting against improved versions of their own tactics. Admiral was studying the training footage with growing unease. They prepare to fight themselves. They prepare to fight anyone who has studied them as thoroughly as they study their enemies, clarified. This creates a dynamic military culture that is constantly evolving, constantly adapting, and constantly preparing for threats that may not yet exist, but which logic suggests will eventually emerge. The display showed human strategists analyzing their own performance at New Geneva, identifying weaknesses in their approach, and developing countermeasures for use by future enemies. Even their victory against the is being treated as a learning experience. Human military analysts are currently developing strategies for use against an enemy that might employ tactics similar to those they used against the. His crystal form was pulsing with nervous energy. They're preparing to fight against improved versions of themselves. Constantly, confirmed. This suggests that humans view military conflict as an evolutionary process rather than a series of isolated events. They assume that every enemy they face will be more capable than the last, either because that enemy has learned from previous conflicts or because they themselves have become predictable through success. The holographic display began showing projections of how human tactics might be countered by an enemy that had studied the New Geneva conflict. Human strategists have already identified 17 different ways that a future enemy might neutralize the tactics they used against the. They are currently developing responses to those potential counters, and responses to the potential counters to those responses. Cadet N's logical mind was reeling. They plan for infinite recursion of tactical development, as far as their analytical capabilities allow, agreed. But this brings us to perhaps the most disturbing aspect of human military thinking. Their assumption that military conflict is an ongoing evolutionary process leads them to conclusions about the nature of peace that are troubling. The display shifted to show human diplomatic and military planning documents that had been shared with coalition intelligence services. Humans appear to view peace not as the absence of conflict, but as preparation for future conflict. Their diplomatic initiatives, trade relationships, and cultural exchanges are all evaluated partially on their potential military utility in hypothetical future wars. Admiral was studying the documents with the expression of someone discovering that his fundamental assumptions about reality might be incorrect. They treat allies as potential enemies. They treat everyone, including allies, as sources of information about potential future conflicts, corrected. Human diplomatic personnel are apparently trained to gather intelligence about allied military capabilities, not out of suspicion or hostility, but because they assume that current alliance structures may not survive future changes in galactic politics. The holographic display showed examples of human diplomatic activities that served dual purposes as intelligence-gathering operations. When humans engage in joint military exercises with allied forces, they are simultaneously learning how to fight alongside those forces and how to fight against them if circumstances change. When they participate in technological exchanges, they study not only what they receive, but also how their trading partners think about technology development and application. The lecture hall had grown very quiet. The assembled cadets and officers were beginning to grasp that they were learning about a species whose approach to existence was fundamentally different from anything in their experience. Tomorrow, announced, we will examine the broader implications of human strategic thinking for galactic stability. We will discuss how human military doctrine affects their relationships with other species, and what their approach to warfare suggests about their long-term intentions as members of our coalition. But as the audience filed out of the lecture hall, many were already wondering whether humanity's membership in the Galactic Coalition represented the opportunity for peace they had hoped for, or the beginning of an arms race that would reshape warfare throughout the galaxy. The atmosphere in the lecture hall had changed dramatically by the third day. News of the events at New Geneva had spread throughout the Galactic Coalition, and the morning's attendance included not only military cadets and officers, but also representatives from the Coalition High Command, several planetary defense ministers, and even a few members of the Galactic Security Council. Commander noted the presence of Admiral, whose ethereal collective had been considered the galaxy's premier military strategists until humanity's arrival. "Before we begin today's session," announced, "I must inform you of developments that have occurred since our last meeting. The information we are about to discuss has been classified at the highest levels, but given the implications for galactic security, the Coalition High Command has authorized its release for educational purposes." The holographic display activated to show a star map of the galaxy's spiral arms. Several systems were highlighted in red, indicating active conflict zones. This defeat at New Geneva has triggered responses from several other aggressive species. The Dominion of has declared war on human colonies in the Rigel sector. The Swarm Collective has launched raids against human shipping in the Outer Rim. Most significantly, the Eternal Empire of has announced its intention to test human military capabilities through what they term instructional warfare. A ripple of concern passed through the assembly. The Eternal Empire was known throughout the galaxy as the oldest and most sophisticated military power, with technologies and strategies developed over millions of years of successful conquest. The Coalition High Command expected these conflicts would provide opportunities to study human military capabilities under more controlled conditions, continued. "We anticipated that facing multiple simultaneous threats would force humans to employ conventional tactics that could be analyzed and incorporated into coalition military doctrine." Admiral spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the harmonic resonances that made ethereal communication so haunting. "Commander, your use of past tense suggests our expectations were incorrect." "Catastrophically so," confirmed, manipulating the display to show real-time battle reports from across human space. "Rather than adopting defensive postures or seeking coalition support, humanity has responded to these multiple threats by implementing what they call distributed warfare doctrine. They are simultaneously fighting 4 different species, using 4 completely different strategic approaches." The holographic display split to show multiple battle zones. Against the Dominion, humans are employing what they term technological asymmetry. Instead of attempting to match superior firepower with equivalent weapons, they are using rapid technological development to constantly stay ahead of enemy adaptation cycles. The images showed human fleets engaging forces with weapons and tactics that seem to change configuration between battles. Human engineering teams are apparently capable of redesigning their military technology during active conflicts. Each engagement with forces provides data that human scientists use to develop more effective countermeasures, which are then deployed to combat units within days rather than the years such development typically requires. Cadets' crystal forms shimmered with disbelief. Real-time military technology development? That should be impossible given the complexity of modern warfare systems. "Human military doctrine includes something they call adaptive engineering," explained. "Their warships are designed to be reconfigured during missions. Their weapons systems use modular components that can be rapidly replaced or upgraded. Even their tactical software is designed to evolve during combat operations." The display showed human vessels that appeared to physically change configuration between engagements. What makes this particularly disturbing is that humans appear to be using their conflicts with the as testing grounds for military innovations. They are not simply trying to win battles. They are using the war as an accelerated development program for military technology that will eventually be applied against other enemies. Admiral's harmonic voice carried notes of deep concern. "They are using warfare as a research and development process." "More than that," replied grimly. Analysis of their technology development patterns suggests that humans are intentionally fighting in ways that will force rapid advancement in specific areas of military science. They are manipulating the conflict to drive their own technological evolution. The holographic display shifted to show the conflict with the Swarm Collective. Against the Swarm, humans are employing what they call mimetic warfare. Instead of fighting the Swarm's numerical superiority through conventional force concentration, they are attacking the Swarm's collective consciousness itself. The images showed battles unlike anything the assembled observers had ever witnessed. Human forces weren't primarily targeting Swarm vessels or installations. They were broadcasting complex data patterns that seemed designed to confuse and disrupt Swarm coordination. The Swarm Collective operates through shared consciousness among billions of individual units, explained. Humans have apparently developed techniques for introducing false information into that shared consciousness, causing Swarm units to receive conflicting orders, incorrect targeting data, and confused tactical assessments. Cadet Hun's translation device crackled with confusion. They are fighting thoughts instead of ships. They are treating the Swarm's greatest strength, its unified consciousness, as its greatest vulnerability, confirmed. Human psychologists and information specialists have developed what they term cognitive weapons designed to exploit weaknesses in collective mental processes. The display showed examples of human information warfare techniques being deployed against the Swarm. They broadcast false memories that make Swarm units believe they have completed objectives they haven't actually achieved. They inject logical paradoxes that cause processing errors in Swarm collective reasoning. They even implant artificial emotions that disrupt the Swarm's normally perfect coordination. Admiral was studying the tactical displays with growing alarm. This suggests humans can weaponize information itself against any enemy that relies on shared information systems, confirmed. But the implications extend beyond the immediate conflict with the Swarm. Human information warfare techniques could potentially be used against any species that relies on advanced communication networks, artificial intelligence systems, or collective decision-making processes. The holographic display shifted again to show the most disturbing conflict of all humanity's response to the Eternal Empire's instructional warfare. Against the Empire, humans are employing what they call temporal strategy. They are fighting not just the current military forces, but the entire historical development of military doctrine. The images showed human archaeological teams working on ancient sites while human fleets engaged current forces. Humans have apparently studied the entire million-year history of military evolution. They understand not only current tactics, but the historical reasoning behind every aspect of strategic development. Cadet Aura's pack-hunting instincts were struggling to process this concept. They are fighting history. They are using history as a weapon, clarified. Human strategists have identified critical decision points in military development and are attacking current forces using strategies that exploit assumptions the Empire made centuries ago. The display showed battles where human forces seemed to anticipate tactics with impossible accuracy. Because humans understand the historical development of strategic thinking, they can predict not only what commanders will do, but why they will do it. They are fighting battles against opponents whose responses they have calculated based on cultural and strategic patterns that developed over geological time scales. Admiral's voice carried harmonics of something approaching fear. You are suggesting that humans can analyze an entire species' strategic culture and use that analysis as a weapon. The evidence suggests exactly that, confirmed. But this brings us to the most troubling aspect of human military development. While fighting 4 different wars using 4 completely different strategic approaches, humans are simultaneously developing what they call meta-strategic doctrine, military principles that can be applied against any enemy regardless of that enemy's specific capabilities or nature. The holographic display began showing human military academies where officers were studying not specific tactics or technologies, but fundamental principles of conflict itself. Humans are attempting to develop strategic thinking that is independent of any particular enemy or battlefield condition. They want to understand warfare itself, rather than simply how to win specific wars. The images showed human strategists analyzing patterns of conflict from across the galaxy, including wars fought by species humanity had never encountered and might never face in battle. They study our own military histories, our victories and defeats, our strategic successes and failures. They analyze the military development of every species in the coalition, not to prepare for war against us, but to understand the fundamental principles that determine success or failure in any conflict. Cadet N's logical mind was reeling from the implications. They are trying to solve warfare mathematically. They are trying to understand warfare as a universal phenomenon, corrected. Human strategic theorists believe that there are fundamental principles governing all conflict, regardless of the specific species, technologies, or circumstances involved. They are attempting to discover and master those principles. The holographic display shifted to show human research facilities where scientists and strategists work together on projects that seem to blur the lines between military science, psychology, physics, and philosophy. Humans have apparently concluded that truly effective military strategy requires understanding not just how to fight, but why conflicts occur, how they evolve, and what determines their ultimate resolution. Admiral was studying the research footage with the expression of someone confronting ideas that challenged her fundamental understanding of reality. They are attempting to develop a unified theory of conflict. Based on available evidence, yes, confirmed. And this brings us to the question that the Coalition High Command has asked me to address directly. Given humanity's approach to warfare, their rapid technological and strategic development, and their apparent intention to understand conflict at the most fundamental levels, what are the long-term implications for galactic stability? The lecture hall had grown completely silent. The question that had been lurking beneath all their discussions was finally being addressed directly. Analysis suggests several possible outcomes, continued, manipulating the display to show projection models. First possibility, humanity's military development will reach natural limits, and they will settle into conventional patterns of strategic behavior similar to other species. The projection showed human military capabilities plateauing and eventually matching the standard patterns of galactic warfare. This outcome appears increasingly unlikely given the exponential rate of human strategic innovation and their apparent lack of interest in conventional approaches to military problems. Second possibility, humanity's strategic development will give them such overwhelming advantages that they will eventually dominate galactic politics through superior military capabilities. The projection showed human forces expanding across the galaxy, not through conquest, but through military superiority that made resistance impossible. Third possibility, humanity's approach to warfare will trigger an arms race that fundamentally changes the nature of conflict throughout the galaxy. The projection showed all galactic species attempting to match human rates of military innovation, leading to rapid and potentially dangerous technological and strategic development across all civilizations. Fourth possibility, paused before continuing, humanity's understanding of fundamental conflict principles will lead to the development of strategies that make traditional warfare obsolete. This projection showed something entirely different, a galaxy where conflicts were resolved through methods so advanced that current military thinking would be as primitive in comparison as stone tools were to energy weapons. Admiral's harmonic voice carried notes of profound uncertainty. Commander, which outcome does your analysis suggest is most likely? His compound eyes darkened as he considered the question. Based on current evidence, I believe we are witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. Humanity appears to be evolving strategically at rates that exceed their own technological or social development. They are becoming more effective at warfare faster than they are becoming more advanced as a civilization. The holographic display began showing timelines comparing human military development with other aspects of their society. Their strategic capabilities are advancing at exponential rates, while their technology, politics, and culture develop at more conventional speeds. This suggests that within a relatively short time, humans may possess military capabilities that far exceed what their apparent level of civilization would suggest. The implications of this statement were staggering. A species with primitive technology but advanced strategic thinking could potentially defeat much more advanced civilizations through superior application of existing resources. The Coalition High Command has asked me to conclude this educational series with recommendations for how our military forces should prepare for future interactions with humanity, announced. After extensive analysis, I have only one recommendation. We must hope that humanity continues to consider us allies, because I am no longer certain that any combination of galactic forces could successfully oppose them if they decided we were enemies. The lecture hall remained silent as the assembled officers and cadets contemplated the implications of what they had learned. They had come to study the tactics of a primitive species. Instead, they had discovered that their own understanding of warfare might be fundamentally inadequate for the conflicts that lay ahead. As the session ended and the audience began filing out, Admiral approached the podium where was collecting his materials. "Commander, there is one question you have not addressed. If humans are capable of this level of strategic thinking, why did they not conquer their own galaxy before joining our coalition?" His mandibles clicked in what might have been grim amusement. "Admiral, that assumes they have not conquered their own galaxy. Perhaps we should consider the possibility that humanity's decision to join our coalition represents the next phase of strategic expansion for a species that has already achieved everything possible within their original sphere of influence." Admiral's harmonic voice carried notes of deep contemplation as she considered this possibility. The implications were clear. If humanity had already mastered warfare within their own galaxy, then their participation in galactic politics might represent not the beginning of their strategic development, but its application on a larger scale. As the last of the attendees left the lecture hall, both officers stood in silence, contemplating a future that might be shaped by strategic thinking beyond anything the galaxy had ever experienced. The lessons of New Geneva had revealed that humanity's approach to warfare was unlike anything previously encountered. But the broader implications suggested that those lessons were only the beginning of changes that would reshape conflict throughout the known universe. The age of conventional warfare might already be ending, replaced by something far more sophisticated and far more dangerous. And at the center of that transformation stood a species that viewed every conflict as a learning experience and every enemy as a teacher in the endless study of war itself.